what it has to be, is going to save us, is going to be the tool we will use to record what is happening so that we can exploit it in case of a failure to ensure this recovery. It will have records as we discussed, and yeah, as you see in bold, it has to be stored in stable storage because after all, its purpose is to have a reliable record of what has happened or what is supposed to have happened or what the system was intending to do, exactly where the system was left when there was a failure. Now, the question will arise, however, you may be thinking, hey, wait a minute. What is going on here? We agreed that our operations would normally be recorded in disk, on the disk, but we don't like this to happen because it will be inefficient. So we are using this memory cache, and we allow some changes just to be reflected on that system cache. Right? There are these writes to the cache that do not imply an output to disk, and the output to disk may happen later. And then to make sure that we know what is going on, we introduce the log, which records every activity. And then the log is also a file. We say it has to be in stable storage. So okay, maybe we made some progress, maybe we substituted writing to many files around just to writing on one file, but maybe the improvement is not a lot. We would prefer to be more flexible. So okay, indeed, we can also put the log entries in a buffer. So we could avoid for some time recording those log entries. Right? But we have to be careful. So we can drop this restriction and place log records themselves in the cache to improve our performance. But we have to do this with a high degree of care. So we have to ensure these principles. Whenever a transaction commits, first we make sure all log entries of what this transaction has done are written on stable storage. So when a transaction reaches its commit point, when it ends, every log entry that was in the buffer goes to stable storage because the committed transaction must keep a clear record of what it has done. And also, in case we have some log records in the buffer and we are about to really do the change on the disk that this log record was describing, of course, we must first write the log entry that describes this change and then do the actual change. So as long as we keep these two principles, all log entries are recorded on disk before a transaction commits. All log entries for a data item are recorded as well on disk before the data item changes. We are fine. We can afford to have even the log itself on buffer. Is there a crash and the buffer disappears? Okay, fine. Some log entries disappear, but those log entries were not describing any effect that had taken place. You see what I mean? They were describing effects we were about to do, but we had not done them. Those that we really do, the writes that we really do, will be reflected on the log. And even if the system crashes exactly at the point when a log entry was written, and the data item was just about to be written, we are still fine. We have the log entry. We know what the system was about to do. And that's exactly the kind of principles we are going to be based on. So, given these general principles, we have to develop some rules and some strategies on how we recover from failures. So what are we supposed to do? Okay, there is a failure. The system crashed. We turn on the power again, we come back to it. There is a log written somewhere. How are we supposed to use it? Well, there are two ways to use it. Either you go forward, or you try to ensure that something did happen, or you try to ensure that something did not happen at all. So in terms of the atomicity that we described before, you remember, transactions have to be atomic. Either they totally happen, or they don't happen at all. We can use the log in two ways. Either we say, okay, based on what you see in the log, make sure that nothing has happened. So you see that the log describes a few steps of a transaction, You're not even sure to what extent they will really done on the disk. You just see that the log says something about them. Okay, go through those entries of the log and make sure you undo them. So you make sure you cancel the effect that they have, if they have an effect. It doesn't matter if they have an effect or not, you see, because the log entry will say, I changed this item. Value before is this, value after is that. You just make sure the value, the before value is there. So that's one option, the undo. And the other thing we can do is to ensure that the transactions that are meant to have happened indeed have fully happened. And we do that through redo. You may be wondering, what do you mean redo? If the transaction is done, why redo it? Well, I redo it exactly because we are not sure it was done. So we see the log says it was done, but we have to double check it. We have to completely confirm it. So we go through everything that the log says, and we perform it once again according to the log. It doesn't matter how many times we perform it because the log just records what the value must be now. Okay, we go through it, and we make sure it is done the right way. So we ensure the all part of atomicity. So the undo is there to ensure nothing has happened, and the redo is there to ensure the whole thing has happened. So these are the two tools. We are going to build strategies based on those two actions. And so here are some examples of when we can use each one. So a transaction is aborted very early, and it was active at the time of crash. Okay, you just see what the log says and you undo any effect it may have. Or in case the log says and transaction was committed, you just go through the log and you redo it because some changes it has recorded on the log may not have been placed on disk. So you make sure it is like that. Let's see an example of how the log works for us. So we have transaction T1 and then T2. And they both operate on a few items, A, B, C, and so on. The initial values of those items are written here on the bottom. And you see that what happens is the following. It reads, T1 reads A. Reading has no effect on the log because there is no writing. So it just takes the value 100, it adds 50, the value becomes 150. It reads B, original value 300, adds one more 100, becomes 400. It writes B. That goes to the log. And the log, you see, is a complete entry. It used to be 300, now it is 400. If you have this entry, you don't worry what happened to the disk. You can just redo it, you record 400 again, or if you want to undo it, you go to the disk and you record 300. And you are sure that you are sure about where you stand. Okay, and the log tells you how to go both ways, how to go back or how to go forward. Further, we read C, the value is 5, we double it, it becomes 10, we write it. Okay, another entry in the log, old value was 5, new value becomes 10. We update A by adding all these three variables together. The result is 560. Okay, the log says old value was 100, new value 560. Transaction 1 is over. So the log writes that transaction 1 now commits. And I put this in red because that's also a very important event. So a commit is just as important as the writes are in terms of transaction. And then you go to 2, and again, it does first a read of 8, it increases to 570, and then it has a write operation. Again, an appropriate entry with old value and new. D is 60, it is read, reduced, nothing written yet. E is read. B that has been changed by transaction 1 is now read by transaction 2, and eventually we have a new value of E written, and also then a new value of D. Okay, we get 2 entries in the log. Old value, original value of E was 80, it became 480. Original D was 60, it became 530. So that's how the log works. You see, it has entries with before and after situations. Actually, we call the old value before image and the new value after image, like in those photos where you have a person before and after some operation. So, and transaction 2 commits eventually. So here comes a new question I want to ask. So given that now we know how a log behaves, what would you recommend? based on the knowledge we have so far, what can we possibly say? So what should we do after a failure? Redo. So what should the rule be? Redo transactions that the log has with start or with commit, or something else? Okay, I see some reasonable answers are collected. Some people say that those that have reached commit are good candidates for just redo to make sure that they have happened. Those that have not reached commit are not good candidates. Some other suggestions are also a bit popular. And some people say it's hard to say. That's also a good answer. So indeed, yeah, so, I mean, you all have a good point. Yeah, those that have reached commit are indeed good candidates for redo. That was I think, the idea we were going through, that if the log has recorded the full transaction up to commit, okay, let's go through it and ensure it did happen. If the log has not recorded everything, maybe that's a good candidate for undo. But should we do that all the time? Can we avoid it sometimes? That's the dilemma we have to solve. So what strategy should we formulate that defines how things work during normal operation? So how exactly we behave when nothing wrong happens, there is no failure, and we just keep writing things to the log and to the disk. And based on how we behave during normal operation, we will define what we are supposed to do during recovery. And okay, our objective is that we want to have efficient normal operation. I mean, from the very beginning, the reason why we introduced the log and all of that was that we wanted to have high speed during normal times. And even after those normal times, if there is a failure, we can afford to have some extra work done during failure. But again, we don't want the recovery work to be overwhelming, so we have to find a balance. Those two desires conflict with each other. Efficient normal operation, quick recovery. We cannot have it both ways. So we have to make decisions. One decision is what will be required to undo, what will be required to redo based on how we behave in normal times. And so how should these normal times work? And based on those normal operations, what recovery we define. So we will go through 4 strategies. So 4 possible answers, complete answers to the question that we just asked. Okay, so that's the idea for today. We will find 4 combinations of whether we need to do undo, whether we need to do redo, or whether only the one or the other, or none of them. So let's start with the heaviest approach. The one that ensures efficiency in normal times and needs the most work during recovery. That is called the undo-redo strategy. Why is it called undo-redo? Because you need to do both of those during recovery. So you see, those strategies, take note of that. Those strategies are named by what you need to do during recovery. So this one is named undo-redo because during recovery you have to do some undo operations and you have to do some redo operations. But actually the strategy also describes what you do during the normal operation. So it's a full recipe of how you work. It is just named after what is done in recovery. And you see in parentheses, you have some idea of what is done during normal operations. So this strategy takes a free approach. It just allows whatever is most efficient to happen and to be decided by the system. So it allows that some updates, which are recorded in the log, some of them may be written to disk during normal operation, but we don't know. It depends. If a good opportunity arises to the system, if the cache has been loaded with a lot of data, it may at some point write them on the disk. And of course, according to the principle we said before, we outlined before, whatever is written to the disk, of course, has to be recorded to the log in storage, not to the log in the buffer, to the log in storage. Okay, so the big word here is may, is that you don't know, is it written to the disk or not? But you just know that if it is written on the disk, it is definitely written on the log as well. It may be written on the log and not yet on disk. You're not sure. So what do you need to do? We really need to do everything. So following a failure, we need to go through and see which transactions have a full start and commit entry in the log. So they're definitely, they're supposed to have finished, and that's why they're written to the log. But maybe if the failure happened exactly at the wrong time, maybe they're not totally written on disk. So you just go through the log entries and you redo them to be safe. So you're sure then you cannot miss it. And then there are other transactions that have some entries in the log, but they're not really finished. Okay, for those, you just go through these entries and you undo them. So you make sure you restore the before situation, whatever that is. Okay, so those are fully atomically completed, and the others are not done. Okay, so what's the benefit of this approach? The benefit is that it allows you to behave as you wish during normal operation. That you may decide what to do. But unfortunately, it requires a lot of work during recovery. And if it's a multitask system, it may have many transactions that need to be undone, and that will be a big load. And okay, the good news is that even if, here is another strange thing that may happen, if a system fails at recovery time, no problem. Even if it fails when you were trying to recover it, again you can go back to the log, and again you can go through transactions, and it will be fine. They are what we call idempotent. So no matter how many times you go through them, the result is the same. It doesn't matter if you redo the redo you have already done. And so by this strategy, we have to redo many transactions. Here is an example of that strategy at work. So here is what happens. Here is a list of instructions by variable L, okay, or step L. It goes from 0 to 10. And these are the numbers of what operations will perform. So transaction 1 starts. It follows the pattern of the previous example. Okay, these are the writes and read. And here is the action we will do based on when the system has crashed. Okay, so the log is going to have those entries, at most those entries. We will arrive up to some point. So we check what is the last instruction written in the log. If it is 0, then okay, we do nothing. If the log shows we went up to a point from 1 to 4, so if we stopped before transaction 1 commits, then we have to undo transaction 1. Because the rule is whatever has not committed needs to be undone. If the crash happens if the last entry in the log is something between 5 and 9, so transaction 1 has committed, so we redo it. We redo it to make sure that its records are really there, its effects are really there, just in case we have missed something. And the good news is that we have a full list of its effects. But we undo transaction 2 because it has not committed. And if the last thing we see is step 10, so both of them have committed, okay, we go through the log, we redo both of them. Okay, so here is a table that shows you what you need to do according to the undo-redo strategy based on where you see the last transaction. Right, either you undo one of them, or you undo the one but redo the other, or you redo both of them. But you see, most of the time you have a lot of work to do. So we ensure good performance at normal operation at the price of a lot of work at recovery. So what about another approach? Yeah, so these are the advantages and disadvantages. We have the most of efficiency, most of flexibility at normal operation, but a lot of work during recovery. So what about an approach? Let's try to design a strategy that will avoid at least some of those actions. And then instead of calling that immediate modification, the name will be deferred modification. So what do we mean deferred? Remember that may be written on disk. So we agreed before that some changes may be written on disk before a transaction commits. The system can decide what is more efficient. Well, let's change this rule. Let's make the rule that at normal operation, before a transaction commits, nothing is written on disk. They're just recorded in the log very clearly. And after a transaction commits, then we write things on the disk. Never before. Okay, let's follow this principle at normal operation. If we follow this principle, immediately it implies that nothing has been written on disk before a transaction commits. So the rule we were following before, that if it hasn't committed yet, just undo it, is not necessary. If it hasn't committed, it has no effect on the disk. So no undo is needed. On the other hand, if it has committed, redo will be done just like it was done before. Okay, because the principle we follow now is that sometime after the commit, we make sure that all the cached entries go to the disk, but in case of a failure, we're not sure if it really happened or to what extent it happened. So we just do what the log says must be done. The good news is that this way, we are faster at recovery time. Undo is never needed. So even if there were multiple transactions taking place, the system crashes, we recover quickly, we keep going. And furthermore, even the log is shorter. It doesn't need before images. You will never need to undo something, so you never need to go back to a previous state. You don't need to worry what the before was. You only care about the after. You will only need to redo, so you just need to know how things must be now, not how they were before. You never go backwards. You only ensure they are forward. The bad news is that those disk writes, which are the actual outputs as you update your database or as new data comes in, has to wait. Okay? It has to wait for every transaction to finish, and it will be done at commit. So there is more work to do at every commit time. Okay, so the disadvantage is the obvious consequence, the other side of the advantage. Okay, so we started with the redo-undo strategy that has full flexibility and does a lot of work at recovery. And then we changed it by dropping the undo part. So we made the strategy no undo, but redo. How about the opposite? Well, the opposite, as you understand, will be exactly the reverse. What if we undo, we have to undo, but never need to redo anything? So that's the other extreme. That's not delayed modification or late, deferred modification. It's immediate modification for sure. That's why we call it strong immediate modification. Remember, with the undo-redo strategy, we said some things may be written on the disk. Here we will say that all updates must be output to the disk before commit. So first they are output to the disk, and then they are committed. So if you see that something has a commit entry in the log, it means that all its effects are on disk. So they were on disk before the failure happened, since the log has a commit entry, which was the last thing that happened after everything else. Because of that, so thanks to this property, we will never have to redo anything. Just like, so before we rendered the undo operations redundant, we made them unnecessary. Now we made the redo operation unnecessary. Whoever has committed has done everything. You never need to redo. Previously, whoever has not committed has done nothing. So it was not necessary to do undo. And of course, now with this strategy, the good news is that, okay, well, again, we avoid work. Redo will never need it. And again, you see, everything is symmetric. It's the opposite of the previous case. Now, you don't need to have after images to the log. in the log, because you never need to ensure that something happened. You only need to go backwards, only need to do undo, so you only need before images. And again, the disadvantage is quite similar. You have some data that will require a lot of operations, a lot of I/O traffic, those data that is just accessed by many transactions. But what other options do we have? Okay, we said there is a strategy that does both redo and undo, maximum efficiency, most work at recovery. We tried two variations. How about a variation that avoids everything? Would it be possible to design things in such a way so that we never need to undo and never need to redo anything? At the end of the day, I think that's the most intuitive thing from one point of view. So when I started talking about recovery and the fact that we have a log file and we want to make sure we record what happened so that if there is a failure, we can go back where we were, I think intuitively, what most people imagine is that, okay, we have some very well-designed system that keeps track of everything, so even if there is a failure, we can immediately go back. Right? Maybe I think that's the first idea that comes to your mind. And actually, up to now, our strategies were not this idea. Our strategies were, okay, we have a log, some things have to be repeated, some things have to be rolled back, undone, just to make sure nothing is wrong. How about not having to do anything? So this approach, no undo, no redo, nothing. So if after a failure, we just switch something and we know that we are fine. Indeed, it is possible to do that, but it's challenging in terms of a lot of bookkeeping you have to do at normal time. So the good news is that, yeah, it requires nothing, no need to change the database much during transaction, and the change will be done by a single atomic action, so you're sure that either it has fully happened or it has not happened. So that's what we should achieve to bring about this strategy. But how do we achieve that? How do we make sure that every change is just a single action, so that either it's fully done or not done at all? Well, there is a method that is called shadow paging. What does that do? It lets the pages that record the data that is under change be in some shadow form, be old pages, which are not written over. And at the same time, it creates new pages somewhere else. It keeps creating this new data, but it really makes this new data active at commit time. If it doesn't arrive at commit time, it just keeps the old shadow pages. So in other words, it creates two copies of every piece of data it works with. And it can freely choose which copy it wants to keep. If it knows the transaction finished, it goes with the new. Otherwise, it goes with the old. So what we were doing with redo and undo actions before is now done instantly. Okay, so no work at recovery, neither undo nor undo. But let me show you a picture. This is what I mean. You have some data here that you are going to change. Okay, as you change them, whenever necessary, you can write a new value. Here is a new value of x, a new value of y. Like in a real file on a disk page. They exist there, but nobody says that these are true yet. They are just written in order to become available if we succeed to arrive at the end. So not only it has those entries, it even creates, you see, it even creates index pointers. So here is x, y, z, they're ready to point there. And during a transaction, all this preparation is done. Double copy. Last value of x, last value of y, z that is not changed, and new values below. When we arrive at commit time, we start preparing our brand new data as it has to be. It's not real, but now we make the preparation even better. Here is the pointer that points to x. We make sure it points to the new version. Y points to the new version. Z was not changed, so you can let Z point to the old version. So now we have the new form of our data in full preparation. Look, it looks all this design here, X, Y, Z, with those pointers, is ready to be used, but still we're not using it. We have just recorded it. So even if we crash at this time, see the middle picture, if we crash at this moment, there is a master pointer there that points to the old data. Okay, we go back, we have the old data. And then when commit arrives, we go to this master record, and we change its pointer, and we say, now don't point to them anymore. These are the old guys. Now point to the new ones. And instantly, when you point to the new ones are ready. So there is no other precaution needed. If you crash before this change, you stay with the old values. If you crash after this change, you know that the change has definitely taken place and you totally point to the new values. Wonderful, isn't it? So you see, we don't need to worry about anything else. Well, okay, although it looks very nice, yes, this shadow paging technique is very useful, and it just requires, even, you can make this last change to that master record just a change of one single bit that takes you to the right direction. So that's beautiful, but of course it also has some disadvantages. So first of all, you access all this stable storage indirectly, and you have to modify it, and you have to even keep a double copy of it. And the old copies that you're not going to use anymore, they have to be released to become free available space on your disk, so you have to do what we call garbage collection. You do garbage collection in programming languages. When you garbage collect your memory, you do it also on disk. It's the operation that, so garbage collection, for those who hear the term first time, is the operation that goes and informs the system that, hey, this space is available. You can use it again. So in this picture, our database system reserves all of that. All of this is reserved to be used by the database. The system has to be informed that at this point, finally, those old stuff is now free to be used. And it has to know that it can go there and record something when it wants to write, another file. And that takes time. That is called garbage collection. It has to know that this space is available. And furthermore, by making multiple copies of the data, so all the data it works with, it makes multiple copies of them. By doing that, it destroys even the original layout. If a file is supposed to be clustered, sorted, well organized, all this is going to become a bit messy. So shadow paging has all these disadvantages. And furthermore, if we want to have concurrent transactions, like those we will talk about next time, things become even more messy. So you see the picture, the full extremes. With undo-redo, we have maximum efficiency at normal operation, most work for recovery. With shadow paging, we have a lot of mess in normal operation, but no work, almost zero work at recovery. And in between them, we have the two strategies that do either only undo or only reduce at recovery. And both of them have some extra work at commit time. So both of them, your database, you will notice that it has some, your system will have some slight delays of performance when it arrives at the point where things are really written on disk. Okay, so that's how things are. So we went through those 4 strategies, and that's the main message for today. Okay, 2 basic building blocks, undo and redo, and 4 strategies that make use of either both of those, or one or the other, or none of them, and then they make use of this shadow paging technique. There is just one more thing to talk about. Yeah, so all that was very good. We have a log file that guides us to what we have to undo and redo. Well, can we help ourselves a bit with that? Could we design something that helps those operations we have to do with the log file become more convenient? Well, yes, there is something, and that's called checkpointing. So checkpointing is an addition to the previous methods. Actually, all methods can use it except shadow paging. So shadow paging doesn't need checkpointing because it doesn't use the log. Those who use the log can do the following. So there is this idea that we periodically flush. What does it mean to flush? Right. So whatever is on the buffer, on the log buffer, we make sure it goes to the disk. And so all of it goes to the disk, regardless of what every transaction is doing. So there are those checkpoint times that come time and again, periodically, during normal operation. And when that happens, we make sure we output those log buffers to the logs, and we also force all the relevant data to go to the disk. And we put an entry on the log file that says, at this time, we did a checkpoint. What does that mean? It means that whatever happened up to this time is secure. You don't even have to worry about it. You never have to undo or redo anything. We took care of that. Okay, it is on disk. Don't worry about it. That's what checkpointing helps us with. And if we do it periodically, it means that we never have to scan a large area of the log. You see, the undos and redos we do never have to look in large territory. So whatever is before a checkpoint instant never needs undoing. We just look at the log backwards, we find at the most recent checkpoint, and to only worry to everything that happened in that area since the most recent checkpoints. And therefore, okay, for the same reason, so we don't have to undo anything before the checkpoint. And in terms of redo operations, only transactions that have a commit after the checkpoint need possibly to be redone. Why? Because if they have commit before the checkpoint, again, you're sure they were fully done, no need to redo them. Right, so no need to bother about what happened before the checkpoint. So I have a question for you, now that I told you what checkpoints are. How would you use checkpoints in this situation? So here is a time axis. Time flows from left to right. And those transactions are indicated with their start timestamp and their commit. So T1 has a commit before this checkpoint. T2 started before, committed after. T3 both started and committed after. And T4 just encountered a system failure while it was still alive. Given that checkpoint, what should we do? Remember, the rule is you don't bother about what happened before the checkpoint. And by the way, you may be asking, which strategy do we mean? Well, some strategies never do reduce, some strategy never does any undo, so we talk about the most general case, right? What may need to be redone or undone. So we have a very large majority. An excessive majority votes for option 3, and that's very good news because they are right. So the idea is the following. The checkpoint tells you that everything that happened up to that point is complete. It's on disk. So T1 is on disk. You don't need to touch it. Unfortunately, T2 and T3 committed after the checkpoint, so we don't know if their commit is really complete. So we have to behave as usual. We have to redo them. And T4 is a transaction that failed, so you do undo for it. Of course, yeah, some people may have chosen something else because, yeah, if you think of the strategy that does no undo, okay, you will not do the undo. If you use the strategy that never does redo, yeah, you will not do the redo. If you use the undo-redo strategy, yeah, you surely go for option 3. So that's why I say that checkpointing can be used with all those 3 strategies. Of course, its power is stronger. It's most useful if you use it in combination with redo-undo, because then it brings you all the benefits. It helps you avoid the redo you would do, and it helps you avoid the undo you would do. it has more benefits. But you can do any combination, however, is legitimate. So that was the big news I wanted to share with you. We learned about 4 strategies. They come in 4 combinations of the tools we are using, the undos and the redos. Each of them have also other names if you want to describe more precisely what happens during normal operation. So they're called deferred or immediate modification, which may be weak or strong. And the last one is called shadow paging. And last, we have the idea of checkpointing that helps the first 3 strategies, so not shadow paging, perform even better. Right? So you never need to combine checkpointing with shadow paging, but you may want to combine it with one of the others. So that was everything for today. And as a last question, I just ask you how you like this lecture, and you can answer that as you live. Thank you.